Right, I'm going to ask Liz and Victor to come back on the stage, and we will go into a Q&A now. As before, hopefully if I can get hold of an iPad, we can see questions that are coming online as well. And we'll do questions in the room, obviously. And once we've been through our Q&A for half an hour or so, if we still have enough questions, we'll then do the final awards, the Curo in Bloom and the community awards. Thank you very much. So just making sure I've got questions that are coming through from the online platforms. So, Vic and Liz are here. Anybody in the room like to start us off with anything that's on your mind that you'd like to ask our Chief Exec or Chair, or that I can help with as well?
Thank you.
All a bit quiet in here. That's fine, because we have some questions from online. So we've got one on Facebook from Matthew, who says, do we know how long it will be for the backlog for repairs to be cleared? This is something that Vic talked about quite a bit earlier on. Do you want to look at this, Vic, or do you want me to pick it up?
I can express it from my perspective, but maybe you'll add some in. So let's start with where we're trying to aim to, and then how long we think it's going to get there. So the promise in our tenancy agreement is that no one should have to wait more than 28 days for a non-urgent repair. And people are waiting much longer than that. And obviously those non-urgent repairs were the ones that were parked during the pandemic and been sat there, and they're the ones that a lot of people are quite cross about us not doing. Our priority, therefore, is to try and honour that tenancy commitment. So the priority is to get what is now 3,200 open orders. Not all inside home, by the way. Some of those 3,200 include communal area orders and stuff. But is to get those down to the 28 days that we are contractually, from a tenancy perspective, really owing that to tenants. That takes us down to 2,200 orders. We need to deal with about 1,000 orders. So that's what we're trying to achieve in stage one of this. The reason I say this, because I think there's a second stage, but this is the first stage. In order to do that, we need to increase the amount of labour we have, and we typically use our own Curo response team. So we like to do most of the repairs ourselves. We do have specialist contractors that we use as well. But when you do the maths, when you do the incoming demand plus that 1,000 backlog, our existing workforce is not going to be enough. Of course, the other thing to bear in mind is that we're entering the winter period, where we typically get a much higher level of requests, because you get heating and other requests. So what that means we're going to have to do, sorry, this is a bit long way to tell you we thought about this, and so there is an end date, is we're going to have to ask colleagues to work overtime. We're going to have to ask for additional fixed trades personnel, and then we're going to have to ask contractors to support us. That's the route to try and increase the amount of available labour over this period. And if anyone's tried at the moment to get anyone to do any work in this country, it's almost impossible. I know from my own experiences that getting a plumber is just, well, I didn't in the end, I gave up. But the point I'm making is, we know the challenge, we know what we need to do, we know where the cavalry comes from, and we're beginning that piece of work. The challenge for our colleagues is to reduce the 1,000. I think the current plan is to get the 1,000 removed by March. The challenge for us is, can we go faster than that? Can we remove that 1,000 way ahead of that? And that, if the 1,000 can be reduced to 2,200, and that means that you can go on My Curo and book an appointment within 28 days from the beginning of April, then the challenge for us now is, can we get more resource? Can we get more contractors? Can we get more fixed term labour to try and reduce that figure down quicker. Now I guess the real answer is probably end of March by the time we get it. Our hope is that we'll be able to, through the support of our colleagues working some extra hours and hopefully getting a few more contracting support, to bring that date sooner. And the reason I'm hesitating, as Paul over there, one of our residents, asked a question about over-promising. So I don't want to over-promise. I want to say that our colleagues have said, if you give us the extra resources that we need, so by extra money, which we've now given consent to spend more, a substantial amount more, we can deliver these 1,000 repair orders backlog to 2,200, and then by the end of March, and then people will be able to go online and call and get an appointment in 28 days. The reason why I said there's a second stage is because when we talk to customers, what they want is a repair to take 10 days. So then there's the contractual tenancy requirement, which says you should not wait more than 28 days. And then there's what the customer wants, which is different, which is the 10-day. That has got to be the next challenge for us in the coming year. So the first milestone, 28 days, reduce the backlog to 2,200 by end of March, and then the following year's challenge, and hopefully I'll see more of you here next year, we can say the progress we're making, getting closer to that 10-day wait. That was a long answer, but I wanted to give very clear indication we've really thought this through and we're aware how important it is.
I'm glad you only had a little bit to say on that one, Vic. Thank you for that, but that is a very comprehensive answer. And just to add a couple of little things to that, we are obviously still carrying out a large number of repairs every day at the moment. So, with the gains that we've made through this Agile project over the winter, we are able to do about 60 to 70 more jobs a week. And if we can staff up, as Vic's talked about, and bring more people in, it does mean that we'll be able to eat into that backlog, hopefully quicker than the end of the financial year, by the end of March. But that's what we're stating at the moment, and we're hoping to bring it forward. I'm going to pick up another couple of questions that we've had online, if nobody in the room is going to interrupt. I'm going to just mention this one to you. In fact, we had a couple quite early on today in one of the first sessions, Liz, which was from people in Bristol and Poulton saying, when are you going to come and visit us? When are we going to have one of these events, etc.? It was one of the things that you rightly talked about in the You Said We Did, because it came up at last year's conference too, and I think it was specifically about Bristol. It has been a difficult year to start doing new face-to-face things, obviously, but from your perspective and the board's perspective, what is it that you'd like to see us do? And then I can add a few bits and pieces to what our plans are.
I think we committed to doing that, and then, COVID's gone on and on, but actually we must meet that commitment, so we must actually try and get out more and do some of those things. I was talking with Vic, and we are building an office in Bristol, which will be really helpful. It will take a while before it's built, but actually that will also enable more interaction and ways of doing these sorts of things safely in different environments. And one of the things that we've tried to do with the whole festival thing is to not just do the big event here and the online stuff, but also to take things out to different places. And we obviously need to do more of that. The more we can use this sort of multi-channel, multi-way of working and getting out to interact with customers and hear from customers, the better. And, COVID put a spanner in the works, but provided we don't have another great surge and that sort of stops us in our tracks again, then I think we need to honour that commitment.
Thank you, Liz. And as you referred to, this week we've been starting these live events in 5 different communities. So they are all in the Bath and North East Somerset area, and we chose to do them in the areas where we have the biggest number of customers. So we didn't do anything in Bristol or Weston-super-Mare or in Wiltshire or South Gloss, but we absolutely will be doing those kinds of things. And we were in Twerton yesterday, we're in Westfield today. I can't remember exactly where we are for the rest of the week, but we've got more events in local areas where we have a lot of Curo residents. And we need to keep that up through the year. I think it might be also useful if we can provide a bit more of an update on where we are building homes, because the office that you're talking about is because we have a construction site there and we're building more new homes. And one of the things that Vic ran out of time a little bit earlier on today to talk about was how we did with developing new homes last year and what's happening this year, because it's an important part of what we do. There is a housing crisis. We're hearing every week that people don't have enough places to live and that they aren't affordable enough. And the way that we are trying to do our piece of that puzzle, how we're trying to solve it a little bit at a time in our area, is to build our own new homes. And we also buy homes from other developers, but we build our own and we sell 2/3 of them, reinvest those profits as per the pie that Vic showed earlier on, and keep 1/3 of them as affordable homes for local families. So we've been doing our bit, but Vic, do you want to talk a bit more about where we're building and how much we're building and what that might mean in terms of where we're visible to new and current residents?
Yeah, so going back to when government decided to cut affordable housing grant, 2011, there was a period not too long after it arrived where effectively it looked like we were going to get absolutely no more government subsidy. And for those that remember, there was a small amount of grant awarded 2011, maybe 2012, that said you could only really build affordable housing with a very modest amount of subsidy, but you have to have rents that are 80% of the market. We only ever delivered around 400 or 500 homes which are called affordable rent, because some of those affordable rented homes, particularly in high value areas like Bath, are simply not affordable for many of the people we serve. So at that point we chose to create our own house building division. So Curo Enterprise was born out of a need to continue to innovate in the face of changing government policy. As it so happens, government has subsequently changed their mind, and we have seen more grant for social rent, which is the rent that 94% of all our customers have, which is about half, 40% to half of the normal rent. Our average rent is £104 a week. But the whole idea of creating Curo Enterprise back then was in order for us to continue to deliver our core social purpose of providing that cheapest possible social housing that we could. The idea is to deliver ourselves about 300 homes, and then to supplement that for buying properties from developers who, through planning law, have to provide affordable housing. But more and more of the housing that we're now getting every year is through Curo Enterprise. Why? Because we can design them how we want, we can set the rents we want, and quite frankly, they're distributed across the new locality so that they're completely tenure blind. You won't know where social rent and housing for sale are. We're in control. We have now got the largest development pipeline in that team. We employ 90 colleagues in that team, and we have sites in Nyatton. We have two sites in Bristol. We have a site that we've recently bought in Frome, and a Weston-super-Mare site, which we also recently bought. All of those are going to be producing the lowest price affordable housing in most cases, except the two new sites, the one in Bristol that I spoke about. Those two, that particular site is 100% affordable, but in most other new developments, which probably I've just described, if you add in Mulberry Park in Bath, you're probably talking at Curo is at some stage of development of around 1,500 homes. So it's a big commitment. It's part of our core social purpose, and it's something that we'll continue to develop and continue to do, because across the West of England Combined Authority, which is where we call home, we're building roughly, not we, but everyone is building about half the affordable homes that people need.
Thank you, Vic. I think if we've got a question at the back there. It's difficult to see in the light. If we can get the mic over there. Just, yeah, we'll go for that question. And I've got another one I'm going to ask Liz in a second.
This might seem like a silly question, but what is classed as affordable and who defines it? And does it cover rent and homes for sale?
It's not a silly question at all. It is quite complex. Vic is the best person at explaining this.
It is ridiculously complicated. And when someone asked Emma a minute ago about could you have more transparency on how we set our rents, I had a little wry smile because it is ridiculously complicated. So
keep it simple.
Keep it simple. The deal goes that all housing associations and all local authorities can only charge rents against a formula that's been set by government. And every property has a rent that's set through that formula, which is needlessly complicated. And there are two principal rents that we have, affordable and social. And it's important to know they're two different types of rent because they exist because they came in at different times and they are connected with different grant rates. Social rent, the one I said, is between 40 and 50% of market rent. The market rent is set on this national formula that includes all sorts of things you're going to think is crazy. So it says, for example, one of the elements of that formula, what was the value of your property in 1999? The other piece in that formula is, what was the average income in your area in 1999? It's a really weird formula, but it produces a value for a property in 1999, which we have to inflate by no more than CPI plus 1. That's the easiest I can explain that rent. And affordable rent is a little bit easier because affordable rent has to be 20% lower than so it has to be 80% of the market rent at the point at which it is let.
I think the other bit of your question, the other bit of your question about what is affordable housing and who defines it, I think maybe the easier way to think about it is it's defined by government because it relates to the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, MHCLG, and it relates to the investment that the government makes in grants. So they are the ones who decide what things are called. Affordable housing is therefore anything that has a sub-market rent, so the social homes that Vic talked about, which is most of what we have here, and also those affordable rent homes, which we don't have very many. Those are 80% of the market, plus shared ownership. So shared ownership homes where somebody buys a level of equity in the home and then over time staircases up by buying more and more, usually with a housing provider like ourselves. That is also classed as affordable homes. So it's shared ownership, social rent and affordable rent. That's basically what people mean when they say affordable homes. So it is a little bit confusing, I agree. Does that answer your question?
I still don't massively get. I still don't get why some are social and some are affordable, and how do people get either of those? If that makes sense, is it like it's a two-tier thing, but
it's two different types of housing, and they're only called that because of the grant that was in place when that house was built.
So why are there not more affordable ones then?
Because there's no grant really available for people to build those types of homes, and because they're not that useful, as Vic mentioned, in our area where we operate, 80% of the market rate isn't really that helpful for people who are struggling. It needs to be lower, which is why on average our homes are about 45% of the market rate, most of our homes, because they're social rent. We can talk to you about this afterwards because I appreciate it's very complicated, but I think we need to move on because we've had quite a few other questions online as well. But any more questions in the room, please put your hands up and let Stephen know and we'll get you to the mic. But one for you, Liz. When will residents be allowed on the board?
Oh, good question. Well, I think one of the things about, I wouldn't call it allowed, in that a resident could apply to be on the board, but they wouldn't get there because they were a resident. They get there because of what they would bring to the board. So there's no reason why a resident couldn't be allowed to be on the board. You could apply in the same way as other people do. I think there was a sort of fashion for having residents on the board where people had, at one point, particularly transfers, had, 5-5-5. So they'd have 5 local authority councillors, 5 tenants, and 5 independents. The reality was that it is a question about representation and those sorts of things, and whether people were really thinking about what was best for the organisation. It didn't work terribly well, to be honest. I wouldn't say that we won't do it, because I think we could do it. But I think what matters is that the board is connected with residents. So one of the things that we're talking about doing to sort of open things up a bit more, as well as doing Board Connect, is to have some sort of a residents group that meets regularly with some board members. And what we would like to do, we were talking about it this morning actually, is have a sort of rotating membership, so it's not just the same 2 people. Because one of the things that happened with resident board members was that they would find that other residents resented the fact that they were the only ones who were in the know, or they'd put pressure on them to sort of try and state their case and things like that. And that wasn't the role of a board member. So what we have been thinking about is how can we open ourselves up so that we hear those voices and we meet with groups of residents, but without changing the board structure. Because we've got nearly 15,000 residents. How can one person represent that lot? They can't, and actually it's not a representation role anyway. So it's quite a difficult one. It's not about not allowed, it's more about the fact that we moved away from having an actual resident, or 1 or 2 residents actually with places as of right, because it didn't work very well for us. I'm not saying never, because I think that's a perfectly good question, but what I would like to do is, one of the things that's happened over the last few years is that instead of just talking to a few residents, which is what used to happen, we now hear from significantly more residents. We hear from, I don't know, all the ones that are on...
About 2,000 we've got
Yes.
involved in different ways. So
Yeah, and that means that we've got we get a much better picture than having one resident on the board. So I think it's just about thinking about what would make sense, but I think we should be open to having those conversations with you and seeing how we can do things better. When we're talking about Board Connect, when we're talking about having a residents group that reviews performance, that sort of thing, which would also have some board members on it, all of those things are ways of having those conversations. And let's talk about it. I'm quite happy to. Let's have those conversations. I will also put in some challenge in terms of, we need to be aware of some of the pitfalls.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. And that is something that comes up reasonably frequently, so I think it's great that you've given that answer. And the short answer is residents are allowed to be board members.
Yes.
And no one's preventing that, but they have to apply like everybody else, and usually there's a set of skills and experience that is important. I'm going to move on to something that's around sustainability and the environment. So there's another anonymous question here from, I think this is from Facebook. How can you help us reduce our carbon footprint? I think this is a brilliant question. Vic touched on a little bit of this earlier on. Just for a bit of context, one of the reports that we have made available on our website, and I don't know if we've got hard copies of it here today. No, we haven't. Okay. But we do have it on our website, is our environmental, social and governance report. So basically how are we doing in terms of being a good corporate citizen, what are we doing about the environment and climate change, what are we doing about our local communities and how we run the business. And that's the first time we've done one of those reports as a separate exercise. So that's available for you to have a look through. There's loads of information in it, but I do think that the question around how we can help you lower your carbon footprints is a really, really important one. If looking at as a business as a whole, most of the carbon that's produced because Curo exists is through your homes. It's not through us driving around in vans or from us having offices, etc. Obviously, we've got 13,500 homes. So that's where most of the CO2 comes from. So we want to work with you to find out ways that we can reduce that. And there are some things that we can do and some things we can help you with. Vic, do you want to pick up anything in particular on this one?
All I'll say is, obviously, the priority has to be about improving the thermal efficiency of the home. That will help not only the planet, but it will also reduce the costs for our residents. So it's a win-win. So that's the priority. This government promised £3.5 billion to help support the decarbonisation of the social housing, what they call the stock of social housing. That's the numbers of homes that are in social housing. We've not really had that 3.6. We've had some initial monies, 50, 60 million on various pilots. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for us is what is the right standard? What does good look like? Our National Housing Federation, which is the group that represents all housing associations, is currently working on developing a social housing standard for all landlords to use as the way of assessing the investment requirements of each property. That's due to be finished later this year before the global summit in Glasgow on the environment. And once that is established as a social housing standard, we can start then costing against that at Curo. What does that mean? The current assumptions, just to give you a scale, the current assumption is that, broadly speaking, the average house will cost somewhere up to £26,000 to meet the government's net zero target. And that's a requirement that we're going to have to meet by 2050. And there are stepping stones between now and 2050 we need to meet. The biggest one is going to be new forms of heating. Now, new forms of heating are changing reasonably quickly. For the homes that we build, after 2025, so it's round the corner really, we can't put gas. And after 2031, we can't put gas in existing homes. These are, round the corner dates, but no one has a solution to what the alternative is. And the worst case scenario, I feel, is to defer to electricity, because an electrical heating system is twice the cost of gas. So actually, decarbonising our stock in that context actually would put more costs on our customers. So I'm just exploring that this is quite a big, challenging issue for us. It is clearly about the investment in our homes, but what the investment should be is really not, anyone doesn't really have an idea, because what we don't want to do in solving one problem is creating another.
Excellent, thank you, Vic. And you might remember from Vic's slide earlier on, we are piloting various things that will hopefully help in terms of thermal efficiency, so keeping your bills down. The Q-bots that we looked at earlier on that squirt insulation in under the floorboards, they could potentially save, I think it's £200 a year on fuel bills if that's proved to be effective. So there are things that we're trying now, and there'll be a load more things that we'll do over time, and that timescale, as Vic mentioned, it's not far away. So we need to be working with you on everything we can to try and reduce our impact on the planet. I've got another question from Facebook, which is, it's just moved. How does Curo ensure disabled tenants are catered for? So I'll kick off on this one. I think firstly, we have to say we don't do a good enough job on this at all. And it's one of the areas that we really want to be focusing on much harder. It's one of the things that came back very clearly when we consulted with groups of residents about our new renowned customer service plan, our customer experience plan. Liz referred to it earlier on. That plan was developed with you and with our colleagues internally, and it has 7 priorities, one of which is disability and diversity. And that's there because our starting point is not a great one. We don't know enough about you, about the people who live in our homes, to be able to say hand on heart we do a great job for people who've got disabilities or any sorts of challenges, because we don't have the data. And we're going to spend a large part of this year getting more and more of that data, because that's really the starting point. We've done a little bit of work more recently with a special survey that some of you may have filled in, which is looking much more at people's needs and wants and behaviours, so not a satisfaction survey. That's given us quite a bit of insight into the groups of customers who might need a different sort of service. But we need to get more data onto our systems, and we need to get more information from you and others so that we can then work out whether we're doing well or not. I suspect not. In fact, I'm sure we're not. And there are lots of things I think we can do better to help disabled residents in all sorts of different ways. So finding the right home in the first place, that's not easy. And going through home search is not a straightforward process, particularly if you have a disability. We have been talking to Bath and North East Somerset Council about that. We have asked them if we can have a separate register for disabled customers. They've not agreed to that yet, but we're still talking to them about it. But we do need to do more to share information with partners like the local authorities, and to get more information from our customers to help people into the right home, to adapt those homes as necessary, and to provide whatever other services are important for people who've got all sorts of different kinds of disabilities. So we're not doing enough, is the short answer. We do have a disability action group that possibly some of you in the room are members of. And we got a new, I think Alistair's going to join that group too. We've got somebody else that we're going to add to that group. And we need that group to tell us the kinds of things that we should be doing better. And they have been really helpful so far. But this is a long journey for us, I think. But it's something that I'm personally very committed to. But it's going to take us a bit of time till we get to a place where we can say, actually, we do a good job for disabled tenants. Because at the moment, I don't think we do. Vic, I know this is something you're pretty passionate about too.
I think you're spot on. Definitely an area that we need to get better at. But I'd like to just make a plug about information, and it is shocking that we only have 46% of disability information on our system. Now, it's shocking because we should have more, but it's shocking because we haven't been able to explain the reason why we need it to tenants and to residents, because we simply haven't been able to explain the value of sharing that information. It's a really sensitive bit of information, but it's so important for us. Practically, it's important for us because we started today by talking about keeping you safe, and without that information, we are fundamentally unable to provide the level of support we need for some residents. So there's a really practical reason why, if you haven't shared your information about disability, please do. We promise to keep it confidential. We promise it to be about how we make services tailored to you at one level, but also picking up the point that Paul's made more generally. It really will help us think about service design, because if we have a one-size-fits-all, it's obviously going to affect some people disproportionately if it happens to affect them badly, because the design of service doesn't cater for a specific need. But the other thing we don't have is really an understanding of the type of housing we should be building. And one of the questions we often get asked is, how much disabled housing do you build? Obviously, building housing that's housing for life is more expensive. Because they got bigger doors, they got bigger footprints, they got more equipment. And we typically build around 10% of all new homes for disabled customers. If we had more intelligence, more information about the type of need that the customers needed, we could present stronger arguments for additional grant and additional support from planning authorities to build more housing for that type of customer group. So there is a wider consideration if we can get that information from customers.
Thank you, Vic, and thanks to Jess as well. I've seen your comment on Facebook, Jess, on this point, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, I believe. Right, we've got time for one more question. I've got one more that's been posted online, but a last chance for anybody in the room to ask a question of Vic or Liz.
Just like to say thanks very much for everything you do under the terrible circumstances of COVID.
Thank you.
Keep safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not planted, by the way. Thank you very much. I'll take the last one on here then. So this hopefully will be quite a quick one. So there was a question, I can't find it now, the exact wording, something like, what do you think are the most important services for us to improve? So Liz, what would you suggest?
Lettings.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard quite a lot about lettings, haven't we, from the team? There's, it's quite exciting in terms of the changes we hope we're going to be able to make with the Agile project we're working on there.
And repairs.
Yeah, you can't have two, though.
I can.
Oh, okay. You can apparently.
She just has.
All right, okay. Vic, would you like to add?
I'll go with repairs.
Yeah, okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much for all the questions online and for the questions in the room as well. We're going to move on to the awards now. So just before we do, I'd like to say thank you very much to Liz, who's going to leave the stage now as well. So thank you for your time, Liz.